You are listening to a sample chapter from The Shadow of Truth, my high school conversion story by Josh Palmer. To read a copy of the full book, please visit the Amazon link in the description. Thank you. Prologue. My name is Josh Palmer, and this is my story. I have been a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints since September 1st, 2018. I converted after a personal investigation that lasted over 16 months, which was sparked by a close friend of mine, Hunter Wilson. Upon approaching my year mark of being in the church, I decided to start working on putting my story to paper in hopes of making it public, a process that took several months and after going dormant for years, has again taken years to complete. It is a story I feel is worth telling. High school is a trying time, and that's when I went through almost the entirety of this story. Changing faiths is also a massive undertaking and oftentimes a trying one. I record my story in hopes that it may inspire and benefit others spiritually, as I know it has for me every time I share the story. It's not just my story, but the story of how learning the restored gospel of Jesus Christ changed a high school student from being a young, naive jackhole to someone striving to become an earnest, holy man of God and a sincere Christian in all he did. It's a story about how the power of Jesus Christ can change people for the better, and what it takes to truly learn and understand that power. To make one thing clear from the beginning, this is not an apologetic smoking gun compilation of every piece of evidence that supports the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I do dabble in apologetics and evidence at several points in the book, but this is first and foremost a recounting of my personal spiritual journey, from a follower of the world to a follower of Jesus Christ. During this retelling, I do bounce around just a little, chronologically speaking, and I do touch on some of the evidence that convinced me, but this will mostly be a straightforward narrative. I also want to make clear that I do my best to tell my story from my 2017 to 2018 perspective in order to best preserve the integrity of the historicity of the story. There are moments where my future self adds some clearly post-narrative commentary, though they are few and far between. I offer that disclaimer because, in some ways, some of the thoughts, perspectives, and positions I held in 2017-2018 are not my thoughts, perspectives, and positions now, especially in regards to my occasional allusions to politics, so I wanted to clarify that ahead of time. My story was not like that of an average convert. At least, it never seemed like it. I did not have the missionaries come to my door one day with a copy of the Book of Mormon in hand. I did not simply read the book, pray, and after receiving a spiritual witness, or good feeling, join. My story is one consisting of much research, from archaeological evidence, historical evidence, and most important to me, biblical evidence. It also consists of personal insights and soul-searching as I prepare to explore religion like I never had before, though let this by no means downplay the importance of evidence, both worldly evidence and spiritual evidence, in my testimony. Both my research and experience led me to make the only conclusion I found logical, as both evidence and experience are key pieces in the conversion story of Josh Palmer. My history is not entirely unreligious prior to April 2017. I was brought up in a religious home, where my father came from a Lutheran background and my mother came from an Episcopalian background. My father was, at the time, and for several years prior, an active attending member of the local non-denominational Christian congregation, Central Christian Church of the East Valley. My mother had once attended that church and tried a couple of others once or twice since, but had not really been an active church attendee since my parents separated in 2009. I myself had not been very active or caring about religion until around my sophomore year of high school. Yes, I believed in God. Yes, I had been baptized. No, I would not murder or plan to commit sexual sins, but that was about the best it got. Truthfully, as a child, I hated attending church, and I would sometimes even hide in the bathroom for most of the service. This was accomplishable because the services were divided based on age, so I was never with my family during church. In a 2009 journal entry, I went as far as to describe my fall break as including boring church. On occasion, I would bring a couple Lego minifigures to play with, or a notepad and pencil to draw on while I waited for the youth service to end. I would often try to sit alone and not involve myself in the games the youth were expected to participate in at the beginning of the hour. Attending worship service was something I more often than not resisted growing up. Since I didn't really care about church, I often fought my dad and complained that we had to go, much preferring to stay at home and play with toys or something else. Since my mom was not an active church attendee, this only further highlighted the contrast and only gave me additional ammunition to throw at my father when I complained about his need to attend church regularly. On occasion, he would let me attend the adult service with him, but despite how much I preferred it, he refused to let me attend with him regularly. He wanted me in the youth class where I could mingle with my peers, but I couldn't stand the youth services. The youth service often came up with activities that required integration with peers, like playing games at the service opening, small group discussion, and filling in empty chairs at the front versus spreading out and being separated. This was far from my cup of tea, further aiding in my resentment of church. When we took a summer trip to North Dakota for the first time in 2011, we got to attend my grandfather's church, which was a Lutheran congregation. The contrast was stark. There were no opening worship songs as we sang hymns instead. There were no games or activities as we had a traditional worship service instead. And even better for me was that we were all combined in one building instead of separated by age. I hadn't been baptized, so I wasn't able to take communion, which bothered me, but otherwise I far enjoyed this service. I told my father as much afterwards, to which he shared some of his perspective. He told me he wasn't opposed to more traditional church services such as this one, which was where he grew up attending. However, he told me he wasn't big on the legalism or structure of the traditional Protestant churches. He very much enjoyed the non-denominational approach of something like Central, later telling me he felt there was far more of an emphasis on the simplicity of things like Christ and grace. A few months later, not too long after turning 11, I was baptized at Central, but it was not out of a love for Jesus Christ and a desire to commit to Him. I was having a fearful night where I sat in my room crying, realizing one day I will die, and I was afraid of what death was like. I had heard the scary stories about hell, the place of flames, the place where your worst day on earth was amazing compared to any experience you will have there. The place where everyone was hungry, but no one could feed themselves. The place you can never get out of for eternity. I did not want to experience this, and I would never know when my time was up. So I got out of my bed, went and grabbed my house phone, called my father as I was at my mom's house, and told him I wanted to get baptized. I wanted to be baptized so I would not go to this awful, horrible place. The next day, he called someone at the church and inquired what the next step would be. This was to take a class held once a month called Discovering Christ for Kids. Kids would attend with a parent to learn more about Jesus Christ and the overall themes of his mission. I was impatient. I wanted to be baptized now, but soon accepted that I had to bite my tongue and be patient. 2 weeks later, I took the class and not only found the teacher entertaining, but also enlightening. I learned a few things, and following the end of class, I got my baptism scheduled 2 weeks out. By this time, I was no longer focusing on my fear of hell. That had long passed. However, I was also not focusing on my baptism as a big deal at all. It was just another part of my weekend. In fact, after the baptism, my father wanted to do a cookout at the local park right next to my church afterwards to celebrate, puzzling me as to why this was even an event worthy of a celebration like that. This goes to show, as I would later reflect, that I was not ready yet, nor did I truly understand the whole concept of baptism. I simply acted out of fear, not love. I didn't do it because I wanted to, but because I felt I had to ensure survival. The time came. It was January 22nd, 2012, during the 11:15 a.m. service. I later wrote in my journal, "Today was the big day. I am getting baptized." I had a lot of extended family present. The auditorium holding the service was dark, and the light was on me. The baptismal font was a small pool on stage left. The event was on camera and on televisions inside the auditorium for all to see. I distinctly remember looking up at that television monitor multiple times, as one was directly to my left facing outward just like I was. But all the audience would see was a kid looking up at something to his left-hand side. As it began, my father leaned into the microphone and spoke. "Hi, my name is Jeff Palmer, and this is my son Joshua. We've been coming to Central Christian for about 3 years, and Joshua's made the decision to get baptized." He attempted to continue to speak, but the crowd cut him off with cheers and applause. After the cheering died down, he continued on. "Joshua, I have a few questions for you." My father asked me, "Do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God?" I leaned into the microphone right outside the baptismal font waters on the edge of the pool. "Yes," I firmly replied. "And do you take him as your personal Lord and Savior?" he said next. "Yes," I repeated. He began, "Based upon that confession, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." As he said this, I prepared by covering my nose and crossing one arm onto the other. My father then dunked me in the water and pulled me back up. And thus, my life as a Christian in name had begun. But my life as a true Christian in spirit had not yet started. I would still willingly sin. I even took the name of the Lord in vain, though I did not understand that I was doing so until years later when my paternal grandfather pointed it out to me, which caused me to stop. The only thing that really came about from my baptism was that when we ventured to North Dakota that following summer, I realized I was able to partake in communion, which was something I eagerly anticipated in the weeks leading up to the trip. Even later that day after the baptism, when I wrote in my journal entry, I had clearly already mentally moved on from the baptism. I clearly had some excitement writing that it was the day of the baptism, and then after that, my journal entry was just as mundane as the dozen before it. I didn't write about my thoughts or feelings, and spent more time talking about my gifts than the actual religious experience itself. My attitude towards church didn't shift either. I still resisted my father regarding regular church attendance, and I resisted even further when it came to having to attend the appropriate youth service. When I began high school, the service for our age group shifted for some reason and was held at 6 o'clock Sunday evenings instead. For a while, I would often head out before it began and walk around the empty church campus until I found a secluded area where I could keep to myself. I would play on my tablet and text friends, or look up Star Wars Rebels videos on YouTube until the time had come for me to be picked up. No one else was on the campus, so it was easy to slip out unnoticed. This lasted until I was caught, of course, though thankfully my getting caught also finally allowed my dad to let me attend adult services with him instead of youth services. After years, a battle had been won. However, while I didn't resist church attendance as much since I wasn't going to the youth services, I still didn't like having to go every weekend, and I still didn't really care too much about church or religion in general. When it came to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I heard of them early on, knowing people in elementary school that were Mormons. I remember at one point hearing they had a book called the Book of Mormon, and that it was separate from the Bible. I remember feeling slightly frustrated and wondering myself why it wasn't just added onto the Bible after Revelation, thinking the Book of Mormon was just another book of scripture of several chapters and not hundreds of pages of text spread across several smaller books. There was also at one point in 3rd grade where I got into a verbal fight with a kid in my class who was asking me if I believed in the true Church of Jesus Christ. I found the kid annoying, so I lied, telling him no just to push his buttons, even though I did actually believe in Jesus Christ. Though at the time, I didn't realize what he really meant by the true church. We both got in trouble and were sent to the Star Room, the disciplinary class that was a sort of middle ground between a timeout and a full-on suspension. When asked for each of our sides of the story, the student pointed out that I said I didn't believe in the true Church of Jesus Christ, to which the lady who ran the Star Room told him that not everyone was going to and that he would have to accept that. Hearing my classmate get reprimanded, I felt bad for lying, even though I guess looking back on it, I really wasn't. It was not until later on in my freshman year of high school that I had my first genuine encounter with the Mormons through my friend Chris Yackerson and another friend who we'll call Rob Dolnick. We would usually walk home from school with one another, and for the span of about a month in the second half of the school year, the two of them would often discuss religion. Chris would defend his faith, and Rob would challenge it, as he was a Lutheran and Chris was a Latter-day Saint. I generally did not pay too much attention to their debates, often being caught up in my mind with my own thoughts, usually concerning girls, Star Wars, or something else, depending on the day. It's rather funny too, because the one challenge to Chris I specifically remember Rob bringing up had to do with Joseph Smith and him allegedly forging checks, unless I am remembering incorrectly. I remember this line of attack confusing Chris, and to this day I don't recall ever seeing a similar critical argument involving forged checks. One day, we were walking home and we encountered two missionaries on the way who happened to recognize Chris. The two companions began talking to him, and shortly afterwards, we were all introduced to each other. One of the missionaries asked Rob if he was interested in coming to church, to which he responded that he was not, and he began trying to head off home. The missionaries then directed their attention to me and asked about my story. I told them I attended Central Christian Church, prompting me to gesture to the building about half a mile away. They told me that was cool, and then one of them said, "Before we leave, I'd like to give you a present real quick." "Ooh, cool, I like presents," I replied enthusiastically. Much to my surprise, the missionary pulled a copy of the Book of Mormon out of his satchel and gave it to me. I took it, dumbfounded by my new gift, and we parted ways. Chris and I also parted ways, and I then backtracked to the local Latter-day Saint building just shy of a quarter of a mile away, where my grandma would normally pick me up and take me back to my mom's house. I casually thumbed through the book, and I also showed my grandma when she picked me up shortly afterwards, to which she said we should try to return it so I do not just throw it out and waste it. We tried stopping by a local church building a couple miles to the north, but of course, no one was present. Truth be told, I did not want to return it, so I made little effort trying to look for someone, though I was still relatively certain the building was deserted. I told her I would hand it to Chris the following morning to try to return, but I did not truly intend to do this, though why I wanted to keep it was truly beyond me. It's possible that I had some sort of mild interest in it, though it's far more likely that I simply wanted it because it was a free book. Later on, I began to develop a crush on a girl who was part of our friend group at the time, and she was also a member of the church. We'll call her Anna. To explain my motivations around this specific time in simple terms, I was a young, foolish boy who was willing to do almost anything to try to get a girlfriend, and I remember her saying at one point we could not really be involved with one another because I was of a different faith. I did not much understand the major differences between our faiths, so I began researching on Mormon.org and nowhere else. I watched the basic videos provided, and I remember chatting with a missionary online, explaining the basic situation to them and asking them a couple of basic questions. Overall, it sounded all right, and I had a decent feeling about it. I recall one time shortly after my research night when Chris and Rob were debating on the way home from school yet again. I stopped them both and asked them to each back up their points from the Bible, taking both by surprise. When I asked him through a text message later on that day what he thought of my getting involved in the debates between him and Rob, Chris told me he was shocked to see me half stick up for his case. I later told him I was considering a possible conversion for Anna, something he found very surprising. As Anna and I continued to discuss the church with one another, she had brought me a copy of the pamphlet For the Strength of Youth, which I read over the next couple of days and found that almost everything in the pamphlet, save for the dating policy, I pretty much agreed with. I even worked to apply some of its principles into my life. I asked Anna what the next step was, and she suggested that I should begin reading the Book of Mormon that the missionaries had given me, as well as start attending church with Chris. I wasn't quite sure how I would spend such a thing to my folks, especially considering the fact that earlier in the year my father only reluctantly allowed me to attend another non-denominational church with a mutual friend. He had afterwards refused me upon a second request to return there. I didn't dwell on the possible conversion too much, though, other than entertaining the idea and the supposed plan to carry it out. All sounded all right, but then the school year had ended and things between us fell apart due to several external factors, nothing to do with the church. Around this same time, I had begun chatting with another girl who was a member of the church, and the two of us became pretty close friends, but she was, at the time, not too faithful. This led to all my interest in a conversion to quickly dissipate, and soon I cared little about it. After a brief discussion with Rob where I confessed to him everything that had transpired between me and Anna, Rob gave me some talking points on issues he had with church doctrine, and I then concluded in my mind that it was a false faith. I still tried to pursue romantic interests of mine in many girls over the next couple years that were Latter-day Saints, but I just told myself I would not change my stance on their faith simply to date them. Though I must admit, such an opportunity to denounce the faith in any sort of terms never really occurred. Shortly after my sophomore year began, I was sitting in church when the pastor, Cal Jernigan, had delivered a message that really moved me and made me think. I cannot for the life of me remember anything that was taught or discussed, but the one detail I do recall is that towards the end he wrapped up his message by saying, "It was once said, 'Thy kingdom come, thy will be done.'" I was left in overall awe, pondering long and hard on what was said. I even remember discussing it with Chris on the way home from school as we walked. We didn't discuss religion much anymore after everything from freshman year. It was here when I began to give the things of religion a little bit of serious thought and attention. While I had started finding church a bit more tolerable after regularly attending adult services, this message instantly sparked a new interest in church for me. From that point on, I was happy to be a member of Central Christian Church. I very much like the idea of let's get rid of all the man-made stuff and just get back to Scripture. Rob Dolnick even told me that, despite his family being practicing Lutherans, if he could choose any type of church to attend, it would be one like Central, one that just teaches the Word. However, towards the end of my sophomore year, my spiritual self took a downturn into hibernation as I met friends like Cole Steiner and Nick Johnson. Nick and Cole swore a lot and had no problem just going through school, messing around, and having a fun time. They were good guys, leave no doubt about that. But fun was the priority, as is typical of a high school male. I began to assimilate, increasing my own swearing and acting like an overall jackhole towards whomever I felt like being one to. Oftentimes, I took things much further or far more extreme and excessive than they did. I threw swear words, racial slurs, and derogatory terms and jokes around like there was no tomorrow. I did not have a care in the world. Around this time, I also became friends with Hunter Wilson, whom I had been acquainted with for almost 2 years by that point. He was also a member of the church, but he did not act like it, being what was often referred to as a Jack Mormon. He was very similar to us, choosing to put on a mask for his family and congregation, but as I always said, we, his friends, knew the truth. And so, like this, we went on for most of junior year, having not a care in the world and simply living in sin, all for the sake of fun. Chris and Rob Dolnick were still around, of course, and were also becoming friends with Cole and Nick Johnson, but my behavior increasingly alarmed the two of them. Chris wasn't as vocal about it, having already accepted the fact that not everyone was going to live the same moral standards he chose. Rob Dolnick, on multiple occasions, vehemently rebuked my poor and atrocious behavior and word choices, even at one point threatening to end our friendship if I chose not to shape up, at least when he was around me. I valued our friendship more than what I perceived at the time as a stupid complaint, and cleaned my act up a bit regarding him, but as for being around everyone else, I carried on business as usual. Around December, I had finally had the realization that I should stop my profane ways because that was not the way a Christian ought to be speaking. I decided to make it my New Year's resolution, and in lead up to the first day of 2017, I chose to swear as much as possible to get it out of my system. I remember driving to a lightsaber march in downtown Tempe to honor the late Carrie Fisher, and I swore as much as possible on the drive there, justifying it to my friends as, I have 2 more days left, I have to do it as much as possible. To make a long story short, my New Year's resolution of going cold turkey failed almost instantly, as I swore within the first couple of days of the new year. I tried for about 3 more weeks to keep myself pure, but the final straw came on the 21st of January, where during a filming session with friends like Nick Johnson, I had just let my mouth run wild. His girlfriend at the time, Martina, was slightly saddened hearing it, uttering encouraging words, "No, Josh, you can do it." I went no longer than a week at best before entirely giving up. It had been as if nothing had changed. I was back to the way I was a month prior. No one, save for maybe Chris Yakerson, was truly disappointed. It was only a matter of a couple of months until something changed with Wilson. Around March, he had decided that he was going to try to get his Mormon life back together. We were all shocked, and when we inquired why, he said it was because numerous girls he knew did not know about his current state of faith. He had a crush on one of these girls, and she did not know the true Hunter Wilson, and she was someone who, in our opinion, was as innocent as they came. Wilson said he wanted to be the way she saw him, and so he decided he would try to clean up his act. His heart was clearly not in it as much as it needed to be, and about a week later, as we were sitting in our math class together, he randomly turned to me and stated, I think I'll go back to being Dirty Grandpa. Due to his more elderly appearance and manner, our friend group dubbed him Grandpa Wilson, and we described his characteristics that he wanted to forsake as Dirty Grandpa. At this comment, I expressed surprise. A few moments later, I said something, to which he responded with an infamous phrase of his involving some rather profane language. To this, I exclaimed a hallelujah and gave him a high five, happily declaring that Dirty Grandpa was back. The Wilson we knew had returned, but only temporarily. About 3 weeks to a month later, he had ultimately chosen to once again try to clean up his act, and unfortunately, as we viewed it at the time, he was far more committed this time around, and he was ultimately successful. While he had a couple of slip-ups from time to time, this was ultimately the end of Grandpa Wilson as we had known him. He had managed to clean up his act relatively quickly in the course of a week or so, and this set the stage for his next big endeavor, which he later described as, "I helped break Josh Palmer, now I need to fix him."